I never thought I'd be the kind of man who checks his phone more than he checks his mirrors. But that was before I found out someone had been sleeping in my house for 11 weeks. My name is Paul Gentry. I'm 53 years old, and I've been a long-haul airline mechanic based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, for going on 22 years. I work on cargo aircraft, the big ones, the overnight freight planes that haul packages across the country while most people are asleep. My shift schedule runs in rotations. 3 weeks on, 1 week off, then repeat. When I'm working, I'm at the MRO facility in Memphis, or traveling with the crew to our satellite locations in Atlanta and Louisville. I'm away from home roughly 18 to 20 days every month. My wife, Linda, passed away 6 years ago. Breast cancer. We never had kids, and after she died, I stayed in the house we bought together in the Steel Creek neighborhood of Charlotte. 4 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, more house than one person needs, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. It still smelled like her for a long time. I had a routine. Leave the porch light on a timer, stop the mail, let my next-door neighbor know I was heading out. Keep to myself, come home, try to sleep without thinking too much. That was my life for 5 years after Linda. Quiet, managed. Until the Tuesday morning in February, when my brother called me while I was in the middle of a pre-flight inspection on a 767 in Memphis. My brother, who lives 40 minutes south of Charlotte down in Fort Mill, doesn't call me during work hours unless something's wrong. So when I saw his name on my phone, I stepped away from the fuselage and answered. "Paul," he said, "you got anybody staying at your place right now?" I remember frowning, turning away from the wind coming off the tarmac. "No." "Why?" "Because I drove past your street yesterday on my way to pick up Angela from her dentist appointment, and there were 2 cars in your driveway, a white SUV and a red sedan. I figured maybe you'd come back early and didn't say anything. But then I called the house line just to check and nobody picked up. I didn't want to call and alarm you if it was nothing." It wasn't nothing. I told him I'd look into it and hung up. I stood there on the tarmac for probably 3 minutes just staring at the fence line past the runway. 2 cars. In my driveway. I'd been gone 9 days. I hadn't given anyone a key. I hadn't asked anyone to come by. My neighbor had a spare, but only for emergencies, and she would have called me if something had come up. I finished my shift because I didn't know what else to do. But I barely slept that night in the crew hotel. I lay there running through every explanation I could think of, and none of them were good. The next morning, I called my home security monitoring company. I'd had a basic system installed years ago, door sensors and a keypad, the kind that alerts a call center if a door is forced. I asked them to pull up any activity log on my account. The woman I spoke with put me on hold for a few minutes and then came back. "Mr. Gentry, your front door has been accessed 47 times in the last 30 days. I asked her to repeat that. 47 entries recorded. The system was disarmed each time using the correct access code. Someone had my code. Someone had been walking into my house, entering the correct code, and the monitoring company had logged every single visit and never called me because there was no alarm to trigger. Technically, nothing was wrong. The system thought it was me. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and caught the first available flight back to Charlotte. I didn't go straight home. I'd learned enough from years of troubleshooting aircraft to know you don't walk into a situation blind. You gather information first. I drove to a coffee shop 2 miles from my house, sat in the parking lot, and thought through what I actually knew. Someone had my alarm code. They'd been coming and going for at least a month. They had a key, or they'd copied one. And they knew my schedule well enough to do all of this 47 times without ever being there when I was. That last part was the one that made me feel sick. I called my neighbor Vera. She's 71, widowed, keeps a close eye on the street, not out of nosiness, but because she genuinely cares about the neighborhood. I asked her, as casually as I could manage, if she'd noticed anything unusual at my place lately. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to bother you while you were working," she said. "But yes, there have been people. A woman, mostly. Sometimes a man with her. They come in the afternoons and leave by evening. I thought maybe you'd rented a room or something. Some people do that now, you know, with those websites." She said it so matter-of-factly that it took me a second to process. Those websites. I thanked her and told her everything was fine. Then I opened my laptop and went to Verbo first, typed in my address. Nothing. Then Airbnb. And there it was. My house. My living room with Linda's blue curtains still on the windows. My kitchen with the farmhouse sink she'd picked out. My backyard with a fire pit we'd built together out of stacked flagstone the summer before she got sick. The listing was called Charming Charlotte Retreat. Quiet neighborhood, minutes to uptown. The nightly rate was $185. There were 11 reviews. The most recent one, posted 4 days ago, said, "Wonderful host, very communicative, felt completely at home." Felt completely at home. In my home. I sat in that coffee shop parking lot for a long time, long enough for my coffee to go cold and for the lunch crowd to fill up and thin out again. I felt something I hadn't felt since the night the hospital called, about Linda. That specific kind of dread where the world keeps going around you but your body has gone very still. Then I started thinking clearly. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a Best Buy and bought 2 indoor wireless cameras and a video doorbell, all of them recording to cloud storage. I drove back to my house in the mid-afternoon when I was reasonably sure no one would be there, parked down the block, and watched the house for 20 minutes before approaching. Nothing moved. I let myself in through the back door, walked through my own house quietly, and felt the wrongness of it immediately. The kitchen smelled like someone else's cooking. A pan was drying on the dish rack that wasn't mine. There were wine glasses in the cabinet that I had never owned. In the living room, one of Linda's throw pillows had been moved to the floor to make room on the couch, and something about that small act of displacement made my chest go tight in a way I wasn't expecting. I walked through every room. The guest bedroom had clean sheets on it that weren't mine. There was a small toiletry bag on the dresser, clearly left by a guest who planned to come back. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, the closet door was closed in a way I never leave it. When I opened it, I could see that some of my hanging clothes had been pushed to one side. A spare blanket that usually stayed folded on the top shelf was gone. Someone had been using my master bedroom, not just the guest room, mine. I set up the cameras fast. Doorbell on the front porch, one camera on the bookshelf in the living room angled toward the entry and main seating area, one in the kitchen above the refrigerator where it blended with the cabinet trim. I didn't change anything else, didn't move the pan, didn't touch the wine glasses. I needed whoever was doing this to have no idea anything had changed. Then I left and checked back into the same crew hotel I used for my layovers in Charlotte. The first doorbell alert came at 4:18 that afternoon. A woman, mid-30s, rolling a small carry-on suitcase, looking completely relaxed, like she was arriving at a hotel she'd been to before. She used a key code on a lockbox I'd never seen before, mounted to my porch railing. A lockbox. Someone had installed a lockbox on my house. I watched through the camera feeds as she came inside, disarmed the panel with my code, and walked through to the guest bedroom like she knew the layout. She unpacked her bag, went to the kitchen, opened my refrigerator. There were groceries in there I hadn't bought. Over the next hour, I watched her make herself at home. She turned on the television in the living room. She poured herself a glass of wine from a bottle she'd brought in her bag. She sat on my couch where Linda used to sit and watch TV. I watched all of it from a hotel room a mile and a half away and did not call the police. Not yet. The same logic the detective in the original case described applied here. If I called them right now, they'd knock on the door, she'd say she had a reservation, and without more context it would become a civil tangle. I needed to understand the whole picture first. She checked out the next morning. By noon the feed showed someone new arriving, a young couple this time. Same routine with the lockbox, same disarming of my code. They stayed 2 nights. On the 4th day of surveillance, the person I was looking for showed up. She was a woman, late 40s, sharp-looking, carrying a laptop bag. She didn't come as a guest. She came in between checkouts with her own key, and she moved through the house with an owner's familiarity. She checked things, straightened things, stripped the guest bedroom sheets and remade the bed from a linen bag she'd brought herself. Then she sat down at my kitchen table and opened her laptop. I took screenshots continuously for 45 minutes. When she left, I ran the footage back and zoomed in on her laptop screen when she'd turned it toward the kitchen window to reduce glare. I could make out enough. A calendar grid. Multiple property addresses listed in rows. Booking windows highlighted in blue and green. This wasn't her first property. It took me another 2 days to identify her. On her third visit, the doorbell camera caught her getting out of a red sedan, the same one my brother had seen in my driveway. Through her windshield, I managed to capture a partial license plate. I turned that over to a friend of mine who does insurance investigations, and he ran it as a favor without asking too many questions. The car was registered to a woman named Christine Marlowe, Charlotte, North Carolina. Christine Marlowe had a LinkedIn profile, property investment consultant and short-term rental specialist, 17 years of experience. She ran a company called Marlowe Property Solutions. I kept watching. On the 6th day, a man showed up. He wasn't a guest either. He arrived in a truck with a small business logo on the door that I couldn't make out on camera. He let himself in with a key, walked through the house briefly, and left within 15 minutes. His visit didn't look like a social call. It looked like a check-in, a verification that everything was in order. I enhanced the logo from the truck as much as the camera resolution allowed. It was stylized letters above a small house icon. I searched Charlotte Home Services logos and cross-referenced until I found it. Precision Home Care Residential Property Services Company that offered cleaning, maintenance, and key holding services for homeowners who traveled frequently. I had hired them 2 years ago, shortly after Linda died, to do a monthly walkthrough and handle any maintenance issues while I was on rotation. I gave them a key. I gave them my alarm code. I gave them my travel schedule because they needed it to coordinate their visits. I sat with that for a long time. The man from the truck wasn't just a maintenance worker. He was the one who had handed over the keys to my life. I called the non-emergency line that evening and asked to speak with someone about a possible fraud situation. The officer I reached, a patient woman who sounded like she'd heard a lot of things, listened to my summary and gave me essentially the same advice that made sense: document everything. Get names if I could. Get footage. Establish a pattern of unauthorized entry and commercial activity. Then come in with a complete picture. So I kept watching for 4 more days. I documented 9 guest check-ins. I documented Christine Marlowe's visits 3 more times and captured her clearly on the doorbell camera on one of them. I documented the man from Precision Home Care visiting twice more. On his second visit, he and Christine arrived within 20 minutes of each other, and through the living room camera, I watched them have a conversation in my kitchen. The audio was partially audible through the camera microphone. Christine said something about bookings through the end of March being solid. The man, whose employee ID badge I finally captured clearly on a close pass by the doorbell camera, said he needed to be careful around the 3rd week because that was when some of the other owners came back. Other owners. Plural. I had suspected this, but hearing it said out loud in my kitchen sent a cold clarity through me. My house was one node in a larger network. There were others. I booked a meeting with a detective at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and walked in with 2 weeks of cloud-recorded footage, screenshots, a printed timeline, and the name, Christine Marlowe, and the name on the Precision Home Care employee badge, Victor Staines. The detective I met with, an older guy who reminded me of the kind of man who coached Little League and never raised his voice, sat across from me and went through everything methodically. He asked good questions. He didn't dismiss anything. When he got to the footage of Christine and Victor talking in my kitchen, he watched it 3 times. "Mr. Gentry," he said, "this is organized. What you've described here isn't opportunistic. This was planned." He told me to go back to my hotel and let the department take it from there. They'd contact me within 48 hours. What they found, as they explained to me in pieces over the following 3 weeks, was that Christine Marlowe had been running this operation for approximately 14 months. She had identified 11 properties in the greater Charlotte area, all owned by people who traveled regularly for work. She'd used Victor Staines and at least one other employee at Precision Home Care to identify those properties, copy keys, share alarm codes, and provide travel schedules. In exchange, Victor received 15% of net bookings from each property he'd flagged. The 11 properties had generated combined somewhere north of $90,000 in Airbnb and Verbo revenue that the homeowners never saw a dollar of. The sting happened on a Saturday morning. Officers waited for Christine to arrive for her between guest cleaning cycle, which her own booking calendar, subpoenaed from Airbnb, told them would happen between 10 and noon. She pulled up in the red sedan and walked up to my porch with her linen bag. 2 plainclothes detectives were waiting inside. Victor Staines was picked up separately at a precision home care job site in Ballantyne. I wasn't there. The detective had suggested I stay away, and I agreed, but he called me when it was done. Christine Marlowe was charged with breaking and entering, multiple counts of theft of services, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Victor Staines faced charges of breach of fiduciary duty, theft, and conspiracy. The other precision home care employee involved was charged similarly. All 3 were taken into custody that morning. Christine's attorney tried to argue that since no property was physically damaged and the guests were legitimate renters who'd paid through an established platform, the criminal threshold wasn't met. The judge at the preliminary hearing didn't agree. The evidence was too organized, too sustained, too deliberately fraudulent. Christine had filed taxes on the rental income under a business entity she'd created specifically for this operation, which added a federal tax fraud angle that the U.S. Attorney's Office eventually picked up. Victor Staines cooperated almost immediately. He gave investigators the names of the other properties and the timeline of how each had been recruited into the rotation. He was looking at a reduced sentence in exchange and got it, 18 months probation and restitution. Christine went to trial, was convicted on all major counts, and received 3 years in state prison plus 5 years probation and a restitution order across all 11 property owners. My share of the restitution came to just over $12,000. It covered the alarm system upgrade I'd had installed, the cost of changing every lock in the house, 2 months of lost sleep and hotel stays, and some fraction of what it had cost me emotionally. Not close to all of it. Precision Home Care closed within 6 months of the arrests. The 2 owners issued a statement saying they had no knowledge of Victor Staines' activities and had cooperated fully with investigators. I believe they didn't know, but I also believe that an employee having that level of access to client homes, security codes, and travel schedules without meaningful oversight is a management failure regardless of intent. The civil suit I joined with 4 other homeowners settled out of court for an amount I'm not allowed to specify. But it was enough. I still live in the house. That surprises some people when I tell them. After something like this, they expect you to leave to want to start over somewhere new and clean. I thought about it. For a while, walking into the kitchen felt wrong in a way I couldn't name precisely. A layered wrongness. My house, and also not my house. The guest room especially. I repainted it. But this was Linda's house too. Her curtains are still on the windows. The fire pit is still in the backyard. I wasn't going to let Christine Marlowe take that from me on top of everything else. What I did change, everything related to access. I hired a different property services company after doing background checks that a private investigator friend helped me structure properly. I installed a smart lock that generates one-time entry codes I can issue and revoke remotely from my phone. No more standing keys with third parties. No more shared alarm codes. I have cameras at every exterior entry point now, and 2 interior ones that I check every morning before I start my shift, no matter where in the country I am. I told Vera everything. She cried a little, which I wasn't expecting, and then she asked me to write down my cell number and put it on her refrigerator. She said she'd call me the moment anything seemed off. No more hesitation about bothering me. I told her she could never bother me about something like that. The part I've had the hardest time processing isn't the fraud itself. It's the schedule. Every time Victor Staines wanted to flag a property for Christine's operation, he opened a client file and looked at the rotation calendar. He looked at when I'd be gone. He looked at the window between my departures and returns and calculated how many bookings could fit inside it. He looked at my life, at my absence, and he saw inventory. There are nights on rotation in Memphis or Louisville when I lie in a crew hotel room and think about that. The way a person can look at your home, your private space, your grief, and see nothing but an opportunity to monetize it. The callousness required for that kind of thinking is something I haven't fully made peace with and maybe never will. I testified at Christine's trial for just under 2 hours. Her attorney was aggressive in cross-examination, suggesting that my security setup had been inadequate, that any responsible homeowner would have noticed the utility changes sooner, that I'd essentially left the door open. The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained most of it, but some of it landed anyway in that courtroom in a way that stung. My utilities hadn't spiked the way the victim in some other cases describes, because Christine had been careful about guest numbers and the house was well insulated. It was the cars in my driveway that started it, my brother being on the right road at the right time and caring enough to call. I think about how easily he might not have driven that way, how this might have gone on another 6 months without a single flag. That's the thing about this kind of crime that people don't fully grasp from the outside. It's designed to be invisible. It works precisely because it doesn't look like a break-in. No shattered window, no missing television, no obvious sign that anything is wrong. The damage is structural, underneath, in the trust you placed in systems and people who are supposed to be on your side. I'd travel the same rotation I always have. The work is good, and the solitude on those overnight freight runs still suits me in some ways, but I check my cameras every morning now without exception, and I have Vera's number at the top of my call log. And I know that home security isn't something you set up once and forget about. It's something you maintain. Linda would have had security cameras up within a week of moving in. She was the practical one. She used to joke that I trusted people too easily, that I was the kind of man who shook hands before asking questions. She wasn't wrong about that either. But I'm learning. If you own a home and you travel for work, or you're away for any extended period regularly, please do what I didn't do. Assume the risk is real before something proves it to you. Check your address on Airbnb and Verbo right now. Just type it in. Look at who has physical access to your home and what they know about your schedule. Change your alarm code regularly. Install cameras, even cheap ones, the cloud recording kind, where the footage can't be destroyed by someone finding the device. Tell your neighbors explicitly, not just generally, that no one should be at your property when you're gone, and give them direct instructions to call you personally if they see anything. Build your own safety net before someone finds the gaps in it for you. And if you discover something has already happened, don't confront it alone and don't wait. Document everything you can safely document, then take it to the police with as complete a picture as possible. You'll be better heard, and the case will be stronger for it. Your home is the place where everything else in your life is supposed to be possible. The place you earn enough to hold on to, the place you come back to. Don't let it become someone else's asset without your knowledge. The people who do this are counting on your absence, your trust, and your assumption that nothing could go that wrong while you're looking the other way. I was lucky my brother took that particular road on that particular afternoon. Most people aren't lucky. Most people find out much later, or not at all. Don't wait to find out. The thing I keep coming back to is how ordinary Victor Staines looked when I finally saw him clearly on that doorbell camera. Just a guy in a work jacket with a logo on the door of his truck. Someone I'd trusted with a key, a code, and a calendar that told him exactly when I'd be gone. I'd handed him the blueprint and never thought twice about it. Because that's what you do when you hire someone to help take care of your home. You extend trust. You assume decency. What I've learned, slowly and not without some bitterness, is that trust isn't the problem. The absence of judgment about where you place it. I trusted blindly because it was easier than being careful, because I was tired and grieving and just trying to keep the house standing while I was on rotation. Christine Marlowe and Victor Staines counted on exactly that. They counted on the assumption that good people make. That the people they pay to help them are operating in good faith. That's not naivety. That's a reasonable starting point, but a starting point isn't a permanent position, and what I didn't do was verify, revisit, or maintain awareness of what I'd handed over. I gave access once and then forgot about it, and that gap between trust and attention is exactly where this kind of scheme lives. I think about the 11 of us whose properties ended up in that rotation. Every one of us was a person who worked hard, traveled for legitimate reasons, and tried to do the responsible thing by hiring professional help. None of us were careless people in our professional lives. We were careless only about the specific mechanism through which we could be exploited, because it had never occurred to us to think about it that way. That's a failure of thinking, not of character, and it's correctable. What got me through the other side of this wasn't luck, though my brother's detour helped. It was the decision to think clearly under pressure rather than act on the first impulse, which would have been to storm into my own house and confront whoever was there. Instead, I gathered information. I built a case methodically the way I troubleshoot a mechanical problem on an aircraft, one confirmed fact at a time, until the whole picture was visible and actionable. That discipline, the willingness to slow down when everything in you wants to act fast, made the difference between a situation that got resolved in court and one that might have gotten messy and inconclusive. And then there was the harder part, not walking away. Selling the house would have been the easier thing. Some of the other affected homeowners did. I understood why. But I made a different choice, which was to repair what had been damaged rather than abandon it, to repaint the room, change the locks, rebuild the routines, and stay. That choice cost something. There were months where being in the house felt like wearing a shirt that didn't quite fit anymore. But I made it fit again, slowly, by taking back ownership of it in every practical and emotional sense I could. I don't carry what happened to me as a wound anymore. I carry it as information. The kind that makes you a more careful, more attentive, more honest person about the gaps in your own vigilance. Linda always said I trusted too easily. She was right. And I wish I'd learned that lesson a cheaper way. But I learned it, and that's the part that matters now.